This bowl is a medical instrument. For roughly 2,000 years, if you got sick in most of the world, from a headache to a fever to a broken heart, a doctor's answer was to cut you open and let your blood run into a bowl exactly like this one, sometimes measured out by the ounce. The idea is far older than most people assume. Egyptian medical texts from around 1500 BC already describe opening the body to release bad substances. But the theory that made bloodletting the default cure across the Western world came from ancient Greece. Physicians believed the body was governed by four fluids called humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health meant balance between them. Disease meant you had too much of one, and blood, being the most obvious and most plentiful, was the easiest one to drain. The man who turned this into an entire medical system was Galen of Pergamon, a Greek physician working in Rome in the 2nd century AD. Galen wrote so extensively and so confidently that his theories on humors and bloodletting became gospel for over 1,000 years. Doctors in medieval Europe, the Islamic world, and beyond trained on his texts almost unchanged. Questioning Galen wasn't just bad medicine, it was practically heresy. For most of that history, physicians didn't actually do the cutting themselves. Diagnosing which humor was out of balance was considered scholarly work, fit for an educated gentleman. Opening a vein with a blade was manual labor, and manual labor was beneath a physician's dignity. So the job fell to barbers, who already owned sharp blades for shaving and haircuts, and who set up shop doing bloodletting, minor surgery, and tooth-pulling on the side. In London, the Worshipful Company of Barbers and the Guild of Surgeons were formally merged into the Company of Barber-surgeons in 1540, formalizing a partnership that had existed informally for centuries. The red and white striped barber pole you still see outside barbershops today is a direct descendant of that trade: red for the blood, white for the bandages used to bind the arm afterward, and in some tellings, blue was added later in America to complete a patriotic palette. The tools of the trade got remarkably specialized. A fleam was a small folding blade, often with several sizes housed in one case, used to nick a vein cleanly. By the 1700s, mechanical scarificators appeared, spring-loaded brass devices packed with a dozen tiny blades that snapped forward in an instant, delivering a controlled grid of shallow cuts for what was called wet cupping. And bowls like the one in this video were purpose-built for the job: wide, shallow, often pewter or ceramic, sometimes with rings marked on the inside so a barber surgeon could see at a glance how many ounces he'd drained, because dosing blood loss was treated with the same seriousness as dosing medicine. Bloodletting wasn't reserved for emergencies, it was preventative maintenance. Almanacs published bleeding calendars built around a figure called the Zodiac Man, showing which body part corresponded to which astrological sign and which days were considered favorable for opening a vein in the arm versus the foot versus the neck. People scheduled bloodletting the way we schedule a dental cleaning, whether they felt sick or not. When bloodletting failed, and it often did, the instinct wasn't to question the method, it was to do more of it. That instinct proved fatal for some very famous patients. In December 1799, George Washington woke in the night, struggling to breathe, likely from a bacterial throat infection called epiglottitis. Over the following hours, his physicians drew blood 4 separate times, an estimated 5 pints in total, close to half of his entire blood volume, along with blistering agents and other harsh remedies. He died that night. Modern physicians reviewing the case consider it plausible that the treatment accelerated his death rather than preventing it. Washington wasn't alone. King Charles II of England collapsed from what was likely a stroke in February 1685. Over the next 4 days, his doctors subjected him to repeated bleedings, cupping, purging, and blistering in a desperate, escalating series of interventions. He died days later, and some historians have since suggested the treatments themselves may have hastened the end. The turning point for bloodletting came not from a dramatic death, but from careful counting. In the 1820s, a French physician named Pierre Louis began doing something almost nobody had done before: systematically tracking outcomes. He compared groups of pneumonia patients who were bled early against those bled later and tallied who actually recovered. His 1828 study found no clear benefit, and in some cases, worse outcomes for aggressive bleeding. Lewis called it his numerical method. Today we'd call it one of the first clinical trials in medical history, and it quietly began dismantling a 2,000-year-old practice with nothing more than arithmetic. The rest of the 19th century finished the job. Germ theory, developed by Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, replaced the four humors with actual microscopic causes of disease, and the entire theoretical foundation bloodletting had rested on simply evaporated. By the early 20th century, routine bloodletting for common illness had essentially disappeared from mainstream medicine. It didn't vanish completely, though, and what survived is oddly fitting. Leeches, once sold by the millions to Victorian pharmacies and kept in decorative jars exactly like the one shown earlier in this video, are still used in modern hospitals today, not for humors, but for genuine vascular science. After reattachment or reconstructive surgery, leeches can relieve dangerous blood congestion in tissue while new veins regrow, thanks to an anticoagulant in their saliva. The FDA formally cleared medicinal leeches as a medical device in 2004, and therapeutic phlebotomy, deliberately drawing blood, is still standard treatment today for a small number of real, well-understood conditions like hereditary hemochromatosis, where the body absorbs too much iron. The bowl is gone. The instinct to drain what's wrong, in a few narrow, carefully studied cases, quietly lives on. Follow for the next object.